It is often said correctly that archaeology is an unrepeatable experiment. No one site is ever like another in its physical characteristics nor in its history, still less in its management. Yet it is also the case that some sites share characteristics. Let's see if I can get this to work. That's it. Share characteristics that make them comparable and measurable against each other. One such category will be the focus of my talk today, the cities of the Roman Empire. What I want to explore in this lecture is how a common form of archaeological monument, in this case the Roman city, can be presented to the public in many different ways and why this might be so. Two cities in green will be my initial focus, as highly unusually, they have parallel developments, which mean that they offer a rare glimpse of how different approaches to management can affect the appearance and presentation of two broadly similar cities with remarkably similar histories. Two other sites will then be used to illuminate how different countries approach a different heritage, an insight which will be further explored through a sample of other countries' approach to their Roman heritage. In doing so, the often political or nationalist relationship between the apparently neutral archaeological site and its presentation to the public will be explored. The two cities of Wroxeter and Xanten in Germany were founded within 20 years of each other in the late 1st and early 2nd century. They lie respectively in the provinces of Britannia and Germania. Both had their genesis as legionary fortresses on the bank of the major rivers, Vericonium on the Severn and the double fortress of Vetra on the Rhine. Refounded as cities within decades of each other, they had different legal designations in the Roman period. Xanten was a colony of legionary veterans with full Latin rights, named Colonia Ulpia Traiana, after the emperor who founded it. Wroxeter, probably founded late in Domitian's reign, had a lesser status as a civitas capital of the local tribe, hence Vericonium Connoviorum. Despite this legal distinction, both sites were remarkably similar in extent. Xanten 75 hectares, Wroxeter 78 hectares. And they share many other characteristics which I've outlined there, and I've cut a section to enable us to catch up here. Each site had a phase of antiquarian activity in the 19th century. The point is that both are abandoned in about 500 and become farmland. They just become farmland. Each site had a phase of antiquarian activity in the 19th century. Wroxeter's being more prominent than Xanten's, but it is the post-Second World War histories of these sites where we see very interesting divergence in treatment, and you can see some of that on the screen there. Wroxeter had been opened to the public as early as 1859 when the town when its public baths were first excavated and displayed to the public. The rest of the town remained in use as active farmland until in 1973 the landowner offered the area to the state. Purchase was agreed, and in 1974 the site came under the care of the Department of the Environment, who ceased all farming on the site. They also drew up a feasibility study which suggested that an archaeological park should be created, displaying the archaeological remains that had been explored in previous years but then backfilled. This would entail road closures and diversions. The site however, this project was never funded, it never took place, it was never agreed, it was never discussed with anyone. In fact, it's never been issued as a public document at all. It was an internal document, and the only reason I knew about it was that there happened to be a copy on the site when I was working there. So Wroxeter, for the past 40 years, has become pasture. It's just had sheep on it and cattle. Consolidation of the archaeological remains of the baths, exposed since 1859, has been underway alongside excavations from the early 1950s. And so basically it's visually untouched. It looks the same as it has always done since the mid-1970s, and before that it was just agricultural fields. However, more recently, much research has been conducted on the site through remote sensing. In fact, the entire town has been surveyed through geophysics 20 years ago. And allied with aerial photographic survey, we now have a comprehensive understanding of the city and a good idea of its sequence of development. The site is also untouched archaeologically, so its level of preservation is excellent, with only about 15% damaged or inaccessible for research. The general public are able to visit the site, the same site as in 1859, but now laid out in conventional British fashion. A set of low walls, virtually all of which are rebuilt. The only exception is the old work, this massive piece of masonry, but now laid out in, within a sea of grass and coloured gravels. Interpretation is provided through display boards, a guidebook and an on-site museum, all of which is standard presentation for an archaeological site managed by English Heritage Trust, as it now is. The contrast with the Xanten could not be starker. In the post-war urge to reconstruct the West German economy, the Roman colonia, or the site of it, was sacrificed to the modern needs of a cement factory and light industry. There's the cement factory. However, a further proposal to quarry away the eastern half of the city to reach underlying gravels, a development mitigated by the proposal to create a publicly accessible lake and water sports centre, provoked archaeologists and some councillors in the responsible authority, the Landschaftsverband Rhineland, to react with a counter-proposal to develop an archaeological park instead. The justification for this was that as the region containing the largest industrial area of West Germany, the Ruhr, their population was largely working class and thus unable to benefit from the then tourist boom in the German economy. They couldn't participate in the rush to the beaches to the Mediterranean, where extensive ruins of Roman cities often acted as a pleasant diversion from their tourism and sunbathing. So why not create a comparable site on their doorstep, paid for by their regional government, owned by their regional government, and built on their own Roman city site? Thus, Archäologischer Park Xanten was created, opening in 1977. From the outset, excavation and research was used to inform the extensive reconstruction of the site. An amphitheatre, a mansio, temple, and sections of the town wall were recreated following the purchase, relocation and demolition of the cement factory. At this time, it should be stressed, the policy of archaeological reconstruction on this site and on the site of the defences flew in the face of accepted practices and enshrined doctrine in the form of the Venice Charter. This was not an ostelosis, but hypothetical reconstruction of former buildings, albeit deeply informed by research and excavated evidence, which in itself formed part of the interpretation presented to the public. This approach in Germany was not novel, although there is neither time nor space here to talk about the long German tradition of archaeological reconstruction, as for example at Salzburg during the reign of Kaiser Wilhelm, part of his attempt to bolster his imperial aspirations. Yet from the outset, Upper X has always been more than just a reconstruction. It was about presenting the whole Roman city, about experimenting with the recreation of Roman technology as well as the buildings. Not only did they build a mansio baths, but they also made sure it functioned, so the public could experience them as they were used at the time. The street grid was laid out as tree-lined avenues, and trades and crafts were practiced, so the visitors experienced this aspect of Roman life too. Much more ambitious and imaginative was the approach taken to the ruins, to presenting the ruins of the public baths, the town baths. Here, all that survived were the robbed-out walls, robbed-out footings, so here, as they were in sometime in the 90s, if I remember. These were fully excavated in the late 50s and mothballed to preserve them before a brilliant architectural solution to their presentation was created. The erection of a cover building in steel and glass that, while conforming to the spirit of the Venice Charter in being obviously modern, was nonetheless designed to echo the actual size and form of the original establishment. Thus, it not only reflects the external outline of this impressive Roman public building, it also gives form and sense to the low-lying ruins within, recreating the building's volume and colour. The interpretation is carried through to the interior as well, using steel forms to recreate the lines of the vaulted rooms. It is a brilliant and bold solution to addressing the perennial problem of how to explain ruins to the public. Interestingly, exactly this solution was proposed at Roxeter too by Philip Barker, one of its excavators. And although this will never happen because of the impact of such an invention, however well executed, would have on the fabric and setting of the substantial standing fragment of the Roman baths at Roxeter, the old work, it's nonetheless, the value of it is very clear. One part of the Roman baths at Xanten remained unreconstructed, its basilica. And you can see this was the site used as the site of a more modern museum, a more modern intervention that now houses the Roma Museum, while also providing a viewing platform and access to the ruins of the baths. More recent work has resulted in the consolidation and display of the temple to the Matres and reconstruction of a rammed earth vernacular building on its original footings. The scale and ambition of APX is evident. It has cost a huge amount of money, perhaps 250,000 Deutschmark/euros, but it attracts nearly 500,000 visitors every year, far more than will ever visit Roxeter. The latter remains stuck in the time warp of an unimaginative and timid approach to the management. No one, it seems, has either the wits or the willpower to change this. I'm not arguing that Roxeter needs to become another Xanten. There are many other imaginative approaches to presentation and interpretation that could be applied at a lower cost, but it is vexing to see how little is being done. To me, what was interesting as someone who researches the Roman period was just how differently state organisations had treated two such similar sites. There seemed no obvious rationale for this other than different national traditions of display and perhaps a closer observance of the Venice Charter in the UK. The point was reinforced for me by visiting two other sites that are in fact the same monument, the Roman settlement of Bliesbruck-Rheinheim. The site has two names because it's divided by the French-German border. It runs there. Rheinheim Roman Villa, with its associated Hallstatt Princess's Grave, lies in Germany, while Bliesbruck, roadside settlement, lies in France. On the German side, ruins are presented as freshly reconstructed footings, meticulously rebuilt to the level to which they survived, and in places, such as the gateway to the complex, to the villa, rebuilt to its full height. Not a scrap of the original masonry is left to inspect. At Bliesbruck, in contrast, the French have meticulously reconstructed or consolidated their ruins, laying out the interiors in gravel and providing cover buildings or shelters. There's one there, for example, to protect the more sensitive areas of the site. When I visited, it was not possible to travel from one site to the other without leaving it and travelling to the other entrance at the other site. There was no connection between the two at all. The approach to display and interpretation on both sides could not have been stronger in their contrast. Yet this was the same site. How was the public meant to understand the functioning of the settlement in the Roman period with its apparent mix of rural and urban evidence? The differences in presentation seen and experienced here cannot be explained by the archaeology and its survival, nor by resources, since both approaches are expensive to achieve. It is a function of the approach taken by the organisations responsible for their management and the separately embedded traditions of each. In Germany, excavation is almost invariably followed by consolidation, followed not by consolidation, but by extensive and often didactically driven reconstruction to recreate a monument that is arguably inauthentic in character, but easily intelligible to the public. The process stabilises the ruins, allows the development of an interpretational framework of the site, as at the Peasport Winery here, for example, but it is highly destructive of the site's authenticity. Xanten is a powerful example of a more measured approach, but it is still viewed by many archaeologists and interpreters elsewhere as an aggressive response to the issues surrounding the interpretation of the site. On a commercial level, however, there is absolutely no doubt about its success and popularity with the public. Examples thus far have highlighted contrasts and similarities in comparable countries and with similar degrees of survival. Yet what happens in those countries where Roman remains are exposed and not buried, as in the deserts of North Africa or Syria, or are more deeply embedded in the fabric of existing cities, such as in Italy, Spain, or Greece? What is the response to survival of Roman structures and cities in these countries? In those countries that are fundamentally Muslim, where the survival of structures relating to a past pagan empire, or less appealing still Christian-era relics, often excavated by former colonial powers, evidence of past that they do not see contributing to their own national or religious identity. There is no answer here. Each country finds its own solution, but several observations can be made. The first is that a prerequisite for the survival of Roman or any other heritage asset is contingent on the acquiescence of society. We have all seen what happens when that acquiescence is withdrawn, even if only by a small and unrepresentative section of society, if they have the power and opportunity to carry out their wishes. Destruction is easy to do. Conservation is difficult and expensive to achieve. Yet it is hard to believe that the motivation of ISIS, Daesh, was purely religious when they blew up elements of Palmyra or attacked the Bardo. The targets hit were not so much as monuments, but what they represented and attracted. Western tourists, with their alien political values and religious beliefs, allied with an aggressive display of bared flesh, flaunted on beaches, and a libertine attitude to alcohol which conflicts with the beliefs of local inhabitants, who are their hosts, the logic is simple. Destroy the monuments, destroy the tourist trade and its poisonous influence. Undoubtedly, the motivation is also economic. It's to destabilise the regime currently in power so they can take over. But this is also the other side of the coin. While by no means condoning what has happened, or may be about to happen elsewhere, if we in the West treat the Muslim world with more respect, their dignity might not have been trampled in the first place, allowing such groups to flourish. The motivation for engagement with the Roman past, therefore, in most Mediterranean Muslim countries is tourism and the economy that follows. This is seen in its most developed form in Turkey and Morocco, and to a lesser extent in Jordan, this is Petra, and Lebanon. It is more contested in Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt, where the modern colonial past wields an influence. The last is also complicated by the Egyptians' national identification with their own indigenous past and its promotion, rather than trumpeting the colonising presence of Rome. Thus, Roman remains are an inconvenient overlay on the desired ancient Egyptian culture beneath. So here we have the temple at Luxor with the late Roman paintings, overlaid on the pharaonic, pharaonic carvings, lettering underneath, hieroglyphs. So this practice carries on, even though the modern Egyptian state could not be further in belief and practice from ancient pharaonic Egypt. There is no connection between the two, other than geographical co-location. In Italy, Greece, Spain or Greece, where Roman remains are both more abundant and enduring, the Roman urban fabric is simply woven into the texture of the evolving city, as it has always been. How far that historic fabric is unpicked is a matter of choice. Some elements, theatres for example, are often rehabilitated as acts for venues of modern concerts or as backdrops to theatrical performances. Yet more often, survival is more accidental than planned, so that unexpected elements, such as the remains of the palace of the emperors at Arles, can turn up with surprising levels of survival, even though no one realised they were there. Everyone's known about this bit for a long time, the apse of the baths. What they didn't realise was it's attached to an Aula Palatina, an audience hall for the emperor, which survives to roof height and is now used as government offices. It has been for many, many decades. But they've just realised it's actually a Roman building. The sense of a Roman past here is is as an embedded element in the living tradition of the city or country. Presentation of the remains of the past thus happens, or not, as a normal element of the fabric of the city, which visitors can take or leave as they wish. Which Rome is it you wish to visit? Roman, Christian, Baroque, Caravaggio, whatever. At times, however, this neutral stance can be politicised. Mussolini's Rome is an example where the selective demolition of decadent barbarian accretions around Roman monuments were excised, and whole medieval districts of Rome were demolished to create an urban streetscape for fascist parades, a clear manipulation of Roman remains as a counterpoint to contemporary society, or the aspirations thereof. In this respect, however, Mussolini was following the precedent of Napoleon, who had similar visions of creating an empire through peeling back the fabric of the city to expose the Roman past at its core. Similarly, the recreation, this was all recreated as a stage set for Hitler. When Mussolini took Hitler to visit Sabratha, he unveiled this to show him who had the real claim to an empire. The embedding of Roman Republican tombstones and other monuments in Trieste's cathedral is a post-war, First World War statement intended to reclaim an Italian heritage for what had become an Austro-Hungarian city. This is the original medieval Duomo with a very nicely, they've sawn a tombstone in half and put it on either side of the doorway. This bit is entirely 1930s. It's built by Mussolini or his cronies, and these sculptures are all created to reflect the Italianness of this building. In earlier times, Pisans, so this is a long tradition, in earlier times Pisans, when constructing the buildings of the Piazza de Miracoli, were careful to enhance the cathedral and other buildings with numerous Roman monuments and inscriptions. This is all inscriptions and cut up with numerous Roman monuments to convince visitors that they had a past as a major Roman city, comparable in scale to their neighbours and significantly rivals in Lucca, whose Roman past was more obvious and, it has to be said, more significant. In Greece, the approach has similarities with the Egyptian attitude. Rome is an inconvenient overlay on an earlier, purer time, and obviously one that's very closely associated with the people. But it can be argued that in Thessaloniki, the selective enhancement and excavation of the late Roman city is a tool to emphasise the connections to European past, the Roman Empire, or more specifically its Greek form as a Byzantine and Christian city, rather than its more recent incarnation as the Ottoman metropolis Salonika. For our final example, we return to England, and specifically London, where the Roman presence is invisible. Although founded as a city by Rome, London fails to display its roots to its visitors. This is how you display, oops, sorry, go back. This is how you display Roman remains in London, or you remove them entirely. And the remains were by no means robust as those seen in the Mediterranean core, and so they don't survive as well, other than as pathetic and ignored fragments. Yet there is a rich Roman heritage from London, a contemporary one, a virtual presentation as a record of what has been discovered. Roman London is captured in glossy publications paid for by the very corporations that have destroyed it. London does not need Roman remains to thrive, and the British have not embedded the Roman element of their history firmly into their DNA, as they have done with the Anglo-Saxons, unless you're from other parts of the UK. I acknowledge this might be different. It is an accepted part of our story, but it is other, and in London at least, must not get in the way of the serious business of making money. What sense are we to make, therefore, of the Roman Empire's urban heritage? We have seen a range of approaches and motivations. We have seen outright rejection through destruction, benign neglect, rampant tourism, political manipulation, and a range of other responses. What is clear is that in managing Roman urban sites, their survival and presentation provoke a range of responses which suggest that their preservation and promotion is not as neutral as might first appear. And the main elements I would highlight are the visibility of that evidence, how much survives, what's the condition, how much can be presented to the public, the motivation, what do people want to do with this stuff, and are the Roman remains serving another function, and of course ownership, who actually physically owns these remains. So the visibility evidence, this is a nice example from Ephesus. This is the 1950s in Ephesus, and this is now. Monuments spring up magically. It is anastilosis. Things are being reconstructed from the fragments that are there. They're not inventing this stuff, but they are creating monuments, if you like. So that's the reconstructive approach, but then you get all the way down through to a destructive attitude. So this is a sliding scale, if you like, of attitudes. Similarly, the motivations vary a great deal. Tourism, obviously a huge motivation for a place like Pompeii. And ownership. Classically, Pompeii is collapsing because the money that is paid into the city is not dedicated to maintaining the city. It tends to end up in the pockets of criminals because it earns a lot of money. It's very attractive. So, there we are. That is my thoughts on how we present Rome. Thank you.